You've been hearing it for years. Legalizing marijuana is moving forward at the state legislature, and then nothing happens. But with DFL majorities in the House and Senate this year, it's possible you could smoke a joint legally in Minnesota as soon as August 1st, and criminal records could be thrown out that date too.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. Recreational marijuana is already legal in 21 states and Washington, D.C. Tonight you'll hear from the bill's Senate author, DFL Senator Lindsey Port of Burnsville. You'll also hear a very strong warning from the Director of Youth Programs at Hazelden Betty Ford. Dr. Sarah Polly warns that pot can result in serious changes in the brain for not just kids, but young adults up to the age of 25. And for those of you thinking that a marijuana business could make you rich really soon, we will hear the reality from one of the nation's first marijuana consultants, Ashley Piccolo. And yes, marijuana consultants are a thing. First, Senator Port. Well, joining us right now is Minnesota State Senator Lindsey Port. She is the author of the legalizing marijuana bill in the state Senate. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Esme.
One big question, when would this go into effect?
Yeah, so assuming we pass it this year and starting in August, decriminalization will happen along with the expungement process will begin. The majority of that expungement process should happen in those first 60 days, which will be the misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors, that sort of thing. The felony process will take longer because those go through a board, which will look at each felony conviction individually and either lower it down to a different penalty or expunge it altogether, depending on sort of where it would land in the new current law.
Okay.
So that piece will take longer.
So interesting. So it could go down to like a misdemeanor if you had a felony. How many people potentially would be affected by this?
So the BCA thinks it's more than 50,000 cannabis petty misdemeanors and misdemeanors that we are recommending all of those would be expunged. So over 50,000 just in that piece. The felony part is much harder to sort of estimate because we have to go through the AG and the BCA will have to go through those individually.
And when would the actual legalization of marijuana happen?
So if
everything goes your way.
Yeah, it would be legal right away, but it's still, you need a license to sell. And so that process will take some time. From what we know from other states, we're expecting about 18 months to 2 years before sort of a full market would be up and running, though pieces of it will start earlier than that. What we've learned in other states is that states that had really robust medical programs were able to get up and running earlier because they already had significant grow in the state. We just don't have that. We have a pretty small medical market. And so it will take time to actually start growing and processing the cannabis.
But is there any start date for when it would be legal in your bill, or is it just contingent on a lot of other things happening?
It would be legal immediately upon enactment, so August 1st. But it just will take some time to actually get those licenses set up and start the grow process and begin to actually get it out to market.
Let me ask you about the finances. Is this going to, obviously the infrastructure that you're talking about, including with the expungement and the selling, that's got to be expensive. And then also obviously taxes. How much money is this going to cost to set this up the way you want it set up? And how much do you think it will bring in?
Yeah, so we have built this bill with an 8% tax on it, which is on the lower end across the country. What we've seen in other states is that, people have pinned a lot of hopes on how much money cannabis can bring in and had really high taxes. Unfortunately, that has then made the product expensive and allowed for an illicit market to really continue to thrive. So our goal was to have a tax that would essentially pay for the implementation, that would pay for the licensing requirements, the expungement pieces. We'll have to do some of that upfront, but the goal is for the program within sort of those first couple of years to really begin to pay for itself. And frankly, not much more. We do not see this as a silver bullet to sort of fund everything that hasn't been funded. We see it as both a social equity and human rights sort of provision that we need to address, and then that the market should pay for itself.
I want to ask you about some of the concerns. One of them is that there is some evidence that young people up till the age of 25 can really be adversely affected. And we're going to talk to a doctor about that. But what do you think about that? I mean, because it sounds like the age of 21 is the age that's going forward. You're the mom of tweens, so obviously you are thinking about this too, as are many of the parents, legislators who are parents.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a concern we're taking really seriously and are continuing to have conversations with medical professionals about it. We are pretty strongly in favor of continuing to have it at the 21 age. As a society, we have decided that that is the age at which you are an adult. And, we don't feel that cannabis is more dangerous than alcohol, and tobacco, which are very, very much, no one is calling for raising the age of alcohol to 25. And what we know is kids are already using. So the thing that we really want to accomplish with our bill is things we have found to be effective in other states on limiting use for young people is education, and education that is centered around peer-to-peer conversations. We were actually really successful in doing something like this in Minnesota with the Target Market campaign around cannabis that really focused on peer-to-peer around tobacco, really focused on peer-to-peer conversations about the harms of smoking, and was very effective at dropping youth smoking use in Minnesota. And so we have built into our bill peer-to-peer education, public service education on the harms that are potentially possible to young people.
If I can just ask you quickly, though, and don't mean to cut you off, but how about law enforcement concerns? There are a number of prominent law enforcement officials who said this will increase traffic deaths in the state of Minnesota.
Again, based on all of the data that we have from other states, and we've looked at it extensively, the states that did broad education on the dangers of driving while impaired had statistically no additional deaths. That was the number one factor that, played into whether you had an increase in fatalities or even serious accidents under a new cannabis legalization. Does the public know that it is dangerous to drive while impaired and that cannabis can impair you? So we have been really, really focused on making sure that that education piece is the strongest in our bill.
And I want to ask you, as the committee that I covered, the House committee I covered last week, one of the representatives who's against legalizing cannabis put out like a display of what she said was 5 pounds of marijuana would look like. And it did look like a lot. Is that the amount that people will be able to have in their homes for consumption?
Currently in the bill, it is, though we are in continued conversations, and that is likely to drop. We would be an outlier at that place. I think it's a combined, we're trying to find the happy medium of, you can have a whole, wine cellar in your basement. That is allowable. We don't expect that you would drink the entire wine cellar at one time. But there's also not an illicit market for wine. And so, I think we are really trying to balance what is your right to have as just a Minnesotan with what is the level at which, if you have that much, you are likely selling in an illicit market. And so that 5 pound number is very likely to drop.
One more question, because we were running out of time here, but yes or no, is this going to pass the legislature this year?
Yes.
Okay. Senator Lindsey Port, thank you so much for all your time. We really appreciate it. And obviously, we will be following this.
Thank you so much, Esme.
Coming up, new research showing the harm marijuana can do to kids and young adults. That's from Sarah Polly of Hazleton Betty Ford.